tune in with that boombox because you're about to be listening to the Card Pull. I'm your host, Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
And today we are talking about the top 10 hidden gems from Dissension.
This is part 1 of our 2-part set review. As always, you can catch part 2 in just a little bit where we'll be discussing the top 10 money cards of Dissension. But without further ado, let's start off our review.
Let's indeed, Kyle. And I'm going to start off my number 10 with a very fun card called Saito Shape. It's an instant that costs 3 mana, 1 of anything, a blue and a green. Choose a non-legendary creature and play. Target creature becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So this is a very fun little combat tricks kind of card that I really enjoy. And if you think about it, it's very similar to a clone card that you see that is Stunt Double, which can be flashed in and become a copy of any target creature on the battlefield. But the reason I like this one a little bit more is target creature becomes a copy of a creature until end of turn. So this doesn't have to be a creature you control. This can be any creature. So you can do some fun kind of politics combo facts like negotiating kind of thing with this. So it's like, all right, non-legendary. So that means you can't become a copy of anyone's commander. So has a little minus there, but let's say somebody plays something huge. Like, we always go to Blightsteel, but a Consecrated Sphinx, if you need some sort of flyer, or if it's just like Master of Cruelties, or anything ridiculous like that. It just becomes something that is advantage at the perfect time, and it's really hard to be able to plan against. And it just seems so much fun.
Yeah, this is a really interesting card, Stu, and let me start off by noting that, number one, I'm so glad we are back in the Ravnica world because it is one of my favorites, and just as I kind of proclaimed in our Return to Ravnica review that the Golgari got the best of Return to Ravnica, I very much feel that both of our top 10s will show the Simic got the best of Dissension, Simic being the blue-green aligned guild. This card being no exception. There are a lot of cool things you can do with this. Let's just think about some of the possibilities for a minute. If you're playing it on 2 of your own creatures, why yes, I would like my 1/1 to become a copy of my Blightsteel Colossus and take out probably 2 people at once. That seems great. You could also target one of your own creatures or one of your opponent's creatures. Why yes, I would like their Blightsteel Colossus to become this harmless little 1/1 until the end of the turn. Either way is really great. Another way that you can use this, though, even, aside from the obvious vice versa of just targeting 2 opponents and making things difficult for everyone that's not you, is as an alternate win con. There are some cards out there, like Biovisionary being one of the ones that I think of the most, in that if you control an X amount of copies of them, you win the game. Saito Shape can help you with that. It can make one of your creatures that is not that creature, and maybe speed things along a little bit faster. Going from one odd card to another now, I just kind of had to put this one on here for the tribal support that doesn't really matter but is kind of awesome. Number 10 on my list to start off is Ratcatcher. This is a black card, and it's a creature. It costs 6 to play, 4 and double black, and is a 4/4 Ogre Rogue with Fear. It also can, at the beginning of your upkeep, search your library for a rat card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. As I said, Rat Tribal. Woo! The tribe that nobody cares about or wanted. Yay, support! Honestly, I just put this on my list because I love tribal support wherever I can get it, especially for tribes like rats, for example. It's just one of those that doesn't really have a heck of a lot of specific support other than maybe a little bit in the Kamigawa block where we have the Nezumi rat people. But Ratcatcher is an especially good one because not only is it a big guy with Fear giving it evasion, which is pretty solid, but also it's a free tutor at the beginning of your upkeep. Free tutors are always good, even though this one is severely limited by the creature type of rat. Just think of what you can get with this. Pack Rat is a really awesome card, and irregardless, it is a rat, so it's tribal. Relentless Rats, the all-star of any rat deck. A commander deck that I'd probably like to see this one in, the only rat legend I'm aware of that would be an okay, decent commander, would be Marrow-Gnawer, because you basically have a rat that sacrifices your rats to get more rats. Seems pretty cool. But if the selection of rats wasn't large enough for you, remember it says rat card, not rat creature card. So cards that are changelings are fair game, And not only that, but changeling instants and sorceries are fair game. In black, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is Nameless Inversion, which, as it stands, is a not amazing but serviceable removal spell. Free tutor of a creature, given that it's a specific type, free tutor of maybe a removal spell or some other good changeling creatures. I don't know, I could kind of get on board with Ratcatcher.
I remember one of your favorite cards is Conspiracy, and that would work with this perfectly, because if you make every single thing into a rat, yeah, like you said, you can tutor for whatever you like. And this card reminds me very much of like Bringer of the Black Dawn. A little bit of a nerfed version, but very powerful, like you said. Free tutoring on your turn, every turn, yeah, that's strong. And I mean, there's even ways to make it so this effect can go off multiple times. So being able to get what you want when you need it, very strong, and that's why toolbox kind of commanders do exist. Now this is a card that I think almost any black deck could use, especially if it's mono black. We're talking about Night Creep. This is a double black instant, and it reads, until end of turn, all creatures become black, and all lands become swamps. So anyone who's ever played or had a very impressive card on them named Blood Moon can understand what kind of effect I'm going for here. So in this case, all lands become swamps. That means whenever you tap a land for mana, it's producing black and it's overriding it to make solely black. So in this case, alright, I have a mountain. The mountain's going to produce black. I have an island. It produces black. Specialty lands, they produce black. But the reason I really like this one is because it does something that you see with a couple other cards in black, like Contamination and Infernal Darkness. Those are ones that are as oppressive as Blood Moon. So we see this kind of effect going in black. So if you're using those kind of cards, you would want to use this one as well, because this is an instant. So if you need to kind of make it so that you have a turn where no one can mess with you, this is a way to enable it. Or if somebody's going to combo off and make it big, you can make it so their turn counts for nothing. They can't produce the mana they need to cast a commander, cast a removal spell. It makes it so that you get a full ride of like freedom, and that alone is really, really valuable.
I have 2 points about this card. One point is that it's very similar, as you said, to those couple cards you mentioned, and also a card called Darkest Hour, which is a really old school enchantment that made all creatures black and just kind of sat there and continued to do that for as long as it was out. The reason that's kind of a cool card is because it combos very well with a commander possibility called Teysa Orzhov's Scion, ironically also from one of the Ravnica blocks, who, whenever a black creature would die, you make a white creature token, and you can sacrifice white creature tokens to exile other people's creatures. The fact that you can continually make the creatures that are produced black as well as white means you get double the value out of it, and there can be some really silly infinite combos there. Even though Night Creep is just an instant and only lasts until the end of the turn like that, the possibility is still there. Also, I'd like to note that making all lands swamps not only has the potential to lock somebody out of the game, but it also turns on abilities like Swamp Walk, where you can possibly, if something like Filth is in your graveyard, just make your whole army unblockable for a turn. That's pretty good. This also shuts off any possible color synergies that anyone else might be playing with. Those aren't all that common, but still, it's something worth considering.
One thing that really blows my mind with this is Isochron Scepter. This is a 2-drop. You can recur this every single turn with Isochron Scepter, and making it so that you can lock people out of the game for no minus is really, really powerful.
That is actually very true, Stu. However, my next card is something that would neutralize this card and actually a lot of other things that kind of make the game what we know. I'm talking about Dovescape. This is an enchantment that is blue and white. It costs 6 to play, which is 3 colorless, and then your choice of either 3 white or 3 blue or any combination thereof of 3 white and or blue mana. And whenever a player plays a non-creature spell, that spell is automatically countered. That player then puts X 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying into play, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Now note right offhand that this does not stop creature spells, therefore it won't stop commanders from being played in any given game of Commander, and it won't stop any creatures at all. However, just try to imagine playing a game without any non-creature spells, that's going to be really, really difficult, even for decks that are heavily creature-based. This kind of turns off board wipes, it turns off spot removal, it turns off pretty much any spell-like effect that isn't stapled onto a creature. Consequently, Dovescape is very, very difficult to get rid of once it hits the board. Outside of a few handful of effects like Acidic Slime and Reclamation Sage, where again you have these spell-like removal effects that can get rid of it stapled onto a creature, which are actually not all that common, Dovescape can be very difficult to handle, and it also just changes the pace of the game, because now instead of doing something that you might have been focused on doing originally, you're focused on accumulating a new resource, which is these bird tokens, because a critical mass of 1/1 flying guys is going to overwhelm you very quickly unless you have your own mass of flying creatures to counter it. This is, ironically enough, a chaos sort of card in white and blue, which is not really the normal place you would see these. You'd think red might have something to do with it. But this was just kind of such a goofy and cool card that I figured I had to mention it.
100%, and it's definitely a good card to take note of. But like you said, the very perplexing thing about this is in blue. Blue loves instants and sorceries. So you have to be running a very interesting kind of deck, or very creature-heavy kind of deck. Only one that I could truly think of would be like Rune of the Hidden Realm, where you have a lot of creatures with enter the battlefield effects that you could abuse over and over again, and make it so that they last. Now moving on to another blue card, I have to talk about one that's just as perplexing as yours, Kyle. We're going to be talking about Psychic Possession. Now this is a 4-drop, 2 of anything in double blue, enchantment aura. You enchant opponent. Skip your draw step. Whenever enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. So let's take a step back and realize what this is very similar to. So the first one in my mind is Necropotence. It's a black enchantment that makes it so you stop drawing, but you can draw cards in a different outlet. This does the same thing, and the reason why I like this kind of over something like Necropotence is because you play this. You have already had your draw step, so it's not minusing you this turn. Now, you get to assess when you play this as well. So if you look at somebody's board status, if somebody has a Consecrated Sphinx, a Rhystic Study out, it's real easy to draw a lot of cards for free. And for that reason alone, I think it's almost a little better than Mind's Eye, in which you also have to put your own mana into this. For this to stay around, it means somebody is not wasting a spell on this. And probably the player who has it equipped to them is going to be like, it's not affecting me at all. You know, that person who played this on me is going to let me keep drawing cards because it's letting them draw cards. So I don't have a problem with this, which makes it so that if there's 4 people in play, the other 2 have to have an answer for this. And if they just let it sit around, it gets nuts. So it's a very powerful card, situational, but it is so strong.
Yeah, this card was kind of the precursor to things like Consecrated Sphinx, which we all know is very, very powerful, and anyone who plays it and automatically has an enormous target on their head just because of the insane amounts of card advantage it can generate. This kind of pairs that back a little bit by only targeting one player with the ability and making you skip your draw step. But remember, you're not really skipping your draw step because at the very least, your opponent is going to be drawing 1 card each turn during their draw step. So you basically just shift your draw step to your opponent's turn. You're not really losing it. You just have to pick the right deck for this thing to be at its full capacity. I mean, if you target a mono green deck with this, are you going to draw a lot of cards? Probably not. You target any deck with blue in it, for example, or maybe even red, which is also fairly good at drawing cards situationally. Heck yeah, this is going to be a good card. Especially in red, which is really funny because red likes to loot, as in drawing and then discarding. They're not going to gain any card advantage. You are. So this card is a pretty cool one. I like it. I'm not always a huge fan of things like curses such as this that only enchant 1 player. But hey, this can give you a lot of advantage, and I think it might be worth considering.
If somebody plays Windfall, or you play Windfall, you draw double the amount of cards. And it's super powerful in decks like Kefnet, who needs to have 7 cards in your hand to be able to attack and block. I think it has its place in Commander. I just think people need to start using it more.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Stu, and I'm going to go on to another card that I feel like I should see more of, but I really don't. It's called Reign of Gore. Now, this is a 2-drop enchantment. It's red and black, which puts it in the Rackdos camp. If a spell or ability would cause its controller to gain life, that player loses that much life instead. Very, very simple effect, but I think we can all agree that this is also incredibly powerful. Just think about turning off life gain and, in fact, turning it into a negative. Life gain is actually a huge part of playing Magic, even if there's just mild passive abilities like the Soul Sisters, for example, or something like Extort with Blind Obedience, or even, at the very least, those life-gaining lands that come into play tapped and gain you 1 life. That turns all of these mostly mandatory life gain triggers into big minuses for you, which can really, really hurt, especially certain decks that rely on gaining life. This is perfectly at home in the classic red and black Punisher shell, which I would probably point out Karvek the Merciless and maybe Mogus God of Slaughter as a possible commander for that. Group Slug, Group Hate. I think, though, Everlasting Torment, which came out in the Shadowmoor Eventide blocks, does this card one better in that it prevents all life gain and also gives everything Wither. However, notably, that card does not actually turn the life gain into life loss, it just stops life from being gained.
Yeah, this is another great enchantment, and it is super powerful. Lifelink is an effect that you do see a lot in Commander, and like one of the strongest white cards with it is Serra Ascendant. Like, they play that turn 1. If you don't have a removal spell to that, it's going to be around for a long time, and they're going to gain a lot of life. But let's say you can play something that counteracts it, maybe not remove it, a card like this, wink wink, it changes that whole dynamic of that card to make it so like, alright, I'll chip away my life, and I'll also chip away yours. Which is not the way that deck wants to be playing Serra Ascendant. I really hate playing against Oloro. This is a great way to make it so somebody is using him as a commander to stop using him, or to make sure they start casting him. So I love it just for that fact alone, and this is a great find, Kyle, and I can say I'd never seen this card before, and I would even consider getting a copy just to be safe that, you know, I could stop something I really don't like. Now, moving on from one thing to do damage to another, my number 7 card is called Demon Fire. It costs X in red, and it is a sorcery. And it reads, Demon Fire deals X damage to target creature or player. If a creature dealt damage this way would be put into a graveyard this turn, remove it from the game instead. Also, it has Hellbent. If you have no cards in your hand, Demon Fire can't be countered by spells or abilities, and the damage can't be prevented. In the past videos, I've targeted cards that make it so you can exile a card once it goes to the graveyard, whether it's the entire grave or just that card itself. It might not come off as such a surprise that I would choose something like this, but the one thing I really do love about this is the Hellbent effect. It's kind of like Banefire in a sense. It can't be countered. So if it's late game, let me go big and go hard, and they can't stop it no matter what they do. The damage can't be prevented. The fact that it says that it can't be countered by effects or abilities or anything at all is really powerful. So this could be a way to knock a single player out of the game, and that is really strong.
I think you're absolutely right, Stu. I mean, looking just on the face of it, this is kind of your generic fireball, except for the part tacked on where it exiles a creature that you can kill with this. Pretty decent. However, the Hellbent ability is what really puts it over the top. Uncounterable, unpreventable damage is pretty solid. And you may think, well, that's only if you have no cards in your hand. When are you ever going to have no cards in your hand as a responsible Magic player? Dude, you're playing this card, you're probably in mono red, and as we all know, red doesn't necessarily have the greatest card advantage. It has some card draw, but mostly, as I said before, goes along with discarding said cards. So I think in especially a mono red deck, something like Neheb the Eternal, for example, chances are you're going to have a very low amount, if not no other cards in your hand when you cast this, and that means you're going to be on the money every single time.
Another commander that I'd actually like to see this in is Roshin Meanderer, who has the effect of tapping itself to produce 4 mana, 4 X spells. Like, alright, you pay 1, you tap this. This is already at 4. And if you have nothing else in your hand, you're going to tap out the rest of your mana. So you at least have 4 to cast him. So that's another on top of that 3. So that's a good little play. And like we said, can kill a creature. I would love to see this in the Neheb, like you said, Kyle. It would just be so good for its versatility right there.
Well, I think we're just going to keep going with this red train, and I'm going to take it right back to Rackdos. And with another enchantment, number 7, is Pain Magnification. This is a 3-cost enchantment. It costs 1 colorless, a black, and a red. Whenever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source, that player discards a card. On the face of it, this card doesn't really look like anything particularly impressive. You do a certain amount of damage, they discard a card. I generally don't love the idea of making other players discard cards because most of the time it's just not high enough impact for me. However, there's a few things that put this card over the top in my opinion. First of all, whenever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source, it doesn't specify what source that is. It could be a lightning bolt that gets cast straight from your hand. It could be 3 or more damage dealt in combat by a creature, or just by some kind of tap ability or whatnot. It doesn't care where the damage is coming from, it just cares that it's 3 or more damage. Number 2, whenever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source. This doesn't mean you have to be the one doing the damage. This means that whenever any one of your opponents deals 3 or more damage from a single source, they're going to discard a card, which makes this really great in multiplayer games and a very helpful political tool. The discarding can add up very, very quickly, so instead of just discarding 1 or 2 cards where it might not be that impactful, you could have people discarding their whole hands to this card, which is exactly where you want to be with it.
I gotta give it to you, Kyle. At first, I didn't really think this was like something that was to be reckoned with, but now that you said it could be from anywhere, yeah, I mean, that's not a thing to really sneeze at. There's a lot of easy ways to deal damage, whether it's just straight up burn, whether it's combat damage, combat tricks, or just regular effects that happen. Yeah, this is something that can keep happening, and, you know, it really isn't something that I would want to personally waste a removal spell on, so I think it could sit on the field. Now, I think it would be a little better earlier in the game, or even mid-game as opposed to late game, but it's definitely interesting. Like, if you had a commander that lined up with this perfectly, it would only help you. And that it is really strong to say that.
Again, it would fit right into decks that are Punisher-based decks like Karvek and Mogus. And as I said, this card really shines in multiplayer because it kind of promotes an Edric Spymaster of Trest type style of play, because your opponents will hit each other because of this card for the negative benefits that it gives to them. If they hit you, remember, it really doesn't hurt you at all.
But now into a color that we haven't touched on too much. I'm going to be going into the green part of our wheel. Fertile Imagination is a 4-drop, 2 of anything, and double green sorcery. Choose a card type. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. Put 2 1/1 green sapling tokens into play for each card of the chosen type revealed this way. You may think this is kind of low impact. It only does one little thing and goes away. And you might get some board status out of it. But the thing I really want to stress about here, this is green. This is a blue effect that you typically see very common with. It's really, really powerful in the fact that, 1, you get to see their hand. Green usually has no way of ever knowing that. Usually it's just doing its own thing, kind of lumbering along, and hoping that it can overpower and overcome in some way against its opponent. So the fact that it can see what's there is really, really powerful. But not only that, you just name a card type. That doesn't mean like a creature type, that means card type. There's lands, there's instants, there's sorceries, and, you know, those all count as a card type. And you also choose a player. So choose the player with the most cards in their hand. See what they have, get a whole bunch of stuff, and build a board. That's really, really powerful, and I just absolutely love it.
I think you're right, Stu. This card is pretty interesting in that it gives you a very blue effect on a very green card, and that certainly could be an advantage for green decks that usually lack knowledge of the opponent's strategy and what they're trying to do. But on the other hand, I look at this card as really basically, does it give you the return on investment? For 4 mana, if you only reveal 1 card of the type that you choose and you make 2 Sapperling tokens, 2 1/1s for 4 mana is not very good. If you reveal 2 cards of the same type from the player's hand, 4 Sapperlings for 4 mana, that's about where I'd want to be, but it only gets better from there, and that's probably where I would want it to be at. However, not guaranteed that you're always going to be there. I should note, though, that cards like Doubling Season and Parallel Lives, the obligatory reference to tokens here, make this card a lot better, so maybe that has something going for it.
I see your card that you have next, Kyle, is one that you absolutely love and enjoy.
We're going from a niche card to one that's a staple pretty much everywhere as far as I'm concerned. Number 6 on my list is the land Ghost Quarter. As I mentioned, it is a land that can tap to give you 1 colorless mana, or it can tap to sacrifice itself and destroy target land. Then the controller of that land searches their deck for a basic land card, puts it into play, and shuffles their deck. Right away, this card passes the quote-unquote land test in that it gives you a mana by coming into play untapped. That's pretty great, even if it is colorless. I should also say, I'm not usually a huge fan of land destruction. I think that in most games of Magic, Commander especially, where mana really matters, land destruction is rude, and I'm not a huge fan of it. That said, I'm okay with cards like Ghost Quarter, because at least it gives you something back for doing something that's pretty rude. I mean, I don't think anyone would fault you by sacrificing one of your own lands to destroy their Gaia's Cradle. Oh, and hey, you get a basic land, or destroying their Nykthos, or their Cabal Coffers, or any number of a bunch of really stupid lands that do really stupid things. The way I look at it, those things deserve to be destroyed, but I do also feel a little bit bad about it, so Ghost Quarter is alright with me. I can destroy their really, really stupid land, and give them a basic land. It even comes into play untapped. It's also kind of funny in decks like Titania, for example, that you can Ghost Quarter yourself and get double the value and even an additional mana left over because the basic land comes into play untapped. Overall, Ghost Quarter is pretty much in almost every deck I build just because of its versatility, and yeah, I really don't have that much more to say other than Dissension was where this card was first printed, so I thought it was obligatory to mention it.
Yeah, it definitely stood the test of time, and you've seen it reprinted time and time again. I'm only going to say that you would typically see cards that are similar to this effect now, like Dust Bowl, Wasteland, Strip Mine, and there's a reason why those cards are very expensive, because, you know, they can do this at a different kind of style. I love this card. As you said, it's very fair, and I mean, if somebody Ghost Quarters me, yeah, I'll be upset I lost a really powerful land, but it didn't set me back a turn. So, under that notes, I will say it's a fair card. Now, moving on from something that's fair to something I think is pretty broken and unfair. I'm talking about, for my number 5 slot, Rite of Passage. It costs 1 for an enchantment aura. It enchants a creature, obviously, and whenever enchanted creature attacks, if its power is 2 or less, it is unblockable this turn. Also, it has Forecast, which for 1 colorless and a blue, you reveal this card from your hand. Target creature with power 2 or less is unblockable this turn, and you can only play this ability during your upkeep once per turn. Now, the reason why I really like this is, alright, yeah, it's an aura, and the reason auras aren't exactly the best thing in the world is because they're a one-time use. Because, alright, I go and I play this, it's on the creature, as long as it's on the creature, the effect goes, but if the creature ever dies, it's gone. And if I want to switch it over to another creature, it won't work. This is able to make it so that it can be played every turn, which is very, very powerful, provided that you have a creature on the field before your upkeep. Now again, it is a creature that is power 2 or less, but if you think about the creatures that are power 2 or less, there's a lot of them, and even commanders for that matter. Like Thada Adel, that's a commander who loves to be able to hit, and hit hard, because it makes it so like every time it does, it gets the ability to get something from an opponent's deck. And that is super, super powerful. But being able to recur that every single time, you continually have a card in your hand. And if you really had to, play the Forecast, and then cast the Aura. Like, you get double the power out of that, which is very, very strong. And the reason why a card like this is so strong, like, it's the reason why you see Rogue's Passage being played. It just makes it so that your opponents can't do anything about it.
Well, as you said, Stu, there are a bunch of commanders and even other creatures that are not commanders that would really love a card like this. In color, we've got things like Edric, Spymaster of Trest, Thada Adel, Geist of St. Traft especially loves auras like this because of the hexproof. Even cards outside of these colors like Master of Cruelties, for example. You want to make that unblockable? Sounds pretty good. I don't know what deck these would end up in together, but hey, it's a possibility. Although I do have to say, that this is where I get my grievance out against Forecast. I despise the Forecast ability. I'm sorry, it's true. Because, number one, you can only forecast during your upkeep and only once per turn. I hate it when cards make me have to make decisions before I have all the information. And look, I get that you can use this, multiple times. You can use it during the upkeep, and then you could just play it during your main phase. But you have to make that decision even before you draw your card for turn. Again, as I said, I don't like making decisions when I don't have all the information. And it's not that cheap either. It's 2 mana for that effect that's only going to last until the end of the turn, and very limited because it only focuses on power 2 or less creatures. Additionally, you can only use the Forecast ability once per turn. I really don't like that, and I think, unfortunately, that's just the price you pay, because when this set was first originally being designed, they were really nervous about making Forecast too powerful, which it could easily have been too powerful. Unfortunately, I think they went the opposite way with it and nerfed it down to the point where Forecast was pretty much garbage. And unfortunately, that's where I kind of evaluate cards with Forecast. This is one of the better ones, though, to be fair.
I can see your side for that, Kyle. But I mean, if you think about it, depending on your board state, you kind of already know if you're going to be using it or not. Like, all right, your commander's out and you want to hit with it. All right, well, I mean, how much more information do you need? Like, you will know if you need a board wipe or not. And you can know also if, like, all right, I only have 1 card in my hand. I need to do this because this is my only play. Or it's like, I have a lot of options. I don't have to waste mana for this. Like, you don't have to play it every turn. You can. And having the ability to play a card multiple times in a singleton format is very powerful. So, I mean, take it for what you want. And I mean, to our viewers out there, let us know. Would this be a card that you would use in your deck, or is it something that you would just leave at the wayside? So be sure to let us know in our comments down below.
Yeah, alright, I've got my beef out about Forecast. I feel a little bit better now, but I apologize for being cruel about that last card. However, I'm going right back to Rackdos, so this next card is all about cruelty. It's called Anthem of Rackdos, fittingly. It is another enchantment in the Racktos colors. It costs 5 mana, 2 colorless, 1 black, and then 2 red. And the reason for the lopsided mana cost is because this card is a little bit more red than it is black. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn, and Anthem of Rackdos deals 1 damage to you. And it again has the Hellbent ability, where as long as you have no cards in your hand, if a source you control would deal damage to a creature or player, it deals double that damage to that creature or player instead. So let's take these abilities one by one. The first one, whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +2/+0 till the end of the turn. That kind of reminds me of something like In the Web of War or Ogre Battle Driver, the only difference being this card doesn't give the creatures haste as well. And in addition, you look at it and realize whenever one of your creatures attacks, your own card does 1 damage to you, and you're like, wait, what the heck? This card isn't any good. But I think where the real money comes in on this card is down at the Hellbent ability, which, as long as you have no cards in your hand, turns this into a one-sided Furnace of Wrath. I don't think I have to tell you how incredibly broken and powerful that effect is. The great thing about the original Furnace of Wrath was it was not a broken card in reality, although you could do some really dumb things with it, because you were just as much at risk as everyone else. Anthem of Rackdos, on the other hand, makes it so there is absolutely no risk to you, and your opponents are about to get hit with a lot of damage. That said, this card is not meant for the faint of heart. So if you don't like basically killing yourself in order to kill somebody else, this card is definitely not for you. I would play this card, though, in a deck that relies on a lot of aggressive black and red creatures and frequently plays out its hand. I used to have an old Kolaghan the Storm's Fury deck that basically made a lot of tokens and then used the commander's dash ability to pump them all. Anthem of Rackdos was a key ingredient in there because even for the price of 1 life a creature, making your 1/1 token into a 3/1 token and potentially having it deal double damage is pretty powerful.
I was actually thinking more along the lines of a Malfegor deck because, you keep dumping your hand repeatedly so you can have the Hellbent turn on at a whim. But like you said, this thing has 2 separate effects. You don't need to necessarily use both effects in that deck. Like, if you're doing something as a direct burn deck, you would want the Hellbent. You wouldn't really care about attacking. You might just have creatures out there for, like, synergy effects like Charmbreaker Devils, for example, where it would just like, all right, it's just going to sit there so I can just accumulate value. If you're going the other way around, yeah, let's get a big stupid army going at you and just swing to the hills and make it say like, all right, yeah, I might be taking damage, but not the amount that you are. So, I mean, it could be used for one or both effects. So I think that is really powerful about it. And like you said before with the furnaces, it's definitely something to be feared. Kyle, I think you finally convinced me. I'm going to have to do a Racktoes card myself now. At my number 4 spot, we have Racktoes Knife. It is a 2-drop artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each blood counter on this, and it has the ability to also tap and sacrifice a creature to put a blood counter on the knife. Then it also has the additional ability for if you pay Racktoes colors, 1 black and 1 red, you sacrifice the knife and target player sacrifices a permanent for each blood counter on the knife. And it also costs 2 to equip. So let's break this down into smaller pieces. It's a 2-drop equipment that costs 2 to equip. Fair for its price right there. Now we have 2 other effects. We have a short-term and a long-term plan for this, which is really, really awesome. You can equip this to a creature, and then that creature has the ability to tap and sacrifice a creature to put a counter on the knife. First thing that comes to mind is anyone who's using some sort of grave packs kind of strategy or any kind of giant stupid token army. You have the ability to pop a token, put a counter on this, and make it go. But also it has the effect to sacrifice the knife, and then you then make a player sacrifice permanents for each one. That means lands, planeswalkers, anything. So let's board wipe first. Then make it so we go ahead and sacrifice the knife. They're going to be targeting their own lands because they won't have any creatures out. Or they're going to target their equipments or their artifacts or their enchantments that they want to save. Because being able to do something like that to a player is really, really strong. And also, let's not forget, Proliferate still exists. You put 1 counter on here, it's real easy to get more. Like, throw this in an Atraxa deck if you could. I mean, the red is a problem. Proliferate does exist in these colors. So it is super powerful. And, I mean, this is just a wild card that is so multifaceted. It's almost like Umezawa's Jeet, with just a little harder to turn on with the effects. Whereas the Jeet has the effects built in, very simple and easy to go. This one takes a little bit of time to start cranking the wheel.
Yeah, I'm kind of nervous about cards like this in general that don't really give you any immediate benefit when they enter the battlefield. Especially if you play this and equip it, it's not going to do anything right away. And if your creature that it's equipped to doesn't have haste, it's especially not going to do anything right away. However, having a semi-free sack outlet is kind of good in a lot of situations. Also, I'd like to note that this card is a control deck's worst nightmare because more often than not, control decks are very permanent light in that the only permanents they end up having out on the battlefield a lot of the time are maybe a handful of utility artifacts and enchantments and lands. If you get this up to enough counters and end up sacrificing it, wow, they're going to really feel the hurt. And as I was saying, this card I think belongs in your general aggressive, swarmy, aggro-type Racktoes deck, where you can afford to get rid of some of your creatures, and that normally a control deck would be very, very powerful against. Not so in this case. This can kind of really turn the tables on people, and it makes it at least an interesting card to consider.
And I see here, Kyle, moving on down the list, you now have a card that involves counters that isn't Racktoes-based.
I do indeed. Like I said, Simic got the best of Dissension, so I'm going to go back to Simic right now. And I picked this card just for name and flavor alone. Frog Mutant, I mean, come on. This thing is just so cool. Number 4 on my list is Plaques Frogling, and that is a really awesome name as well, I'm just saying. It costs 3 to play. It is 1, a blue and a green, putting it firmly in the Simic colors, and it has Graft 3, which means it comes into play with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, making it a default 3/3. Whenever another creature comes into play, you may move a +1/+1 counter from this creature onto it. You can also tap 2 of any color to give target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it Shroud until the end of the turn. There are a lot of things to consider with this card, but let's just start off with the fact that base power and toughness, it's a 3/3 for 3. That's good stats regardless of what kind of deck this goes in. However, the Graft ability and the second ability are really where the money is on this card. I know in some cases it's maybe useful to play politics and use this to graft +1/+1 counters onto your opponent's creatures. Those kinds of issues do come up, and they are kind of handy. However, that being said, what you really want to do with this card is play it, and then play out some additional creatures that you really want to be protected, and as long as this guy still has at least one counter on him, they will be. He protects himself, which is part of the reason why Plaxcaster Frogling is so powerful. So you can protect a whole army as long as you keep mana up for it and your deck is focused around providing +1/+1 counters. In Simic colors, there are a lot of those. I mean, you have the Army of Graft creatures from the Dissension set, you have the Evolve creatures from the Return to Ravnica Simic, and then you just have any number of other green/blue creatures that either put counters on themselves or put counters on other creatures. I think this is probably the best graft creature of the lot, just because of how powerful an ability Shroud is to give out to any one of your creatures anytime you want. And also, like I was saying, flavor, it's a frog shooting a laser beam or eating a laser beam or whatever the heck it's doing, and it just says, I don't care. Look at that expression on the thing. It's just so funny. I love this card a lot.
I didn't think about the graft in that kind of regard, because I was thinking initially that, if a creature doesn't have counters, it's just essentially useless. But the fact that it can distribute the counters is very, very strong, especially like we said before with, Doubling Season, or any of the other cards that had the ability to double counters on permanents. So you can make it so that, alright, I'll move a counter from here, put it on this guy, he gets 2 instead of 1, and then have some sort of different ways of putting counters back on this guy. There's even a land that does graft, which is super strong. He's almost like a secondary form of Lightning Greaves, just a little bit more mana intensive. If you could run more than one, you would. That's why people also run Whisper Silk Cloak and Swiftfoot Boots. So I mean, why would you not want to double down on some of this stuff? Plus it's a creature. Green tutors creatures super easily. I wish I could use it more in my decks, but I can definitely see why this is a strong card, and I can see why it's in your top 5. Now moving into my third pick, I'm going to go with a card that I just think it's almost a white staple at this point. It's called Condemn. It is a 1-drop, meaning a single white instant. Put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness. Right off the bat, this should come off very, very similar to you as Sword to Plowshares or Path to Exile, because it pretty much is. It's getting rid of a creature, and it's also giving that owner some sort of replacement effect. More similar to Sword to Plowshares because they get life equal to its attack, but in this case, it is the toughness. Usually not a lot of creatures have big butts, so they won't be gaining too much, and yes, this card's going to the bottom of the deck, so, it's not permanent in this case where the other two exile it. But it's just such a solid form of removal. Alright, for 1 mana, I'll take this out of the equation. I'll give you a little life. I don't have to worry about it anymore. And if you think about, like we said before, Sarah Ascendant, attack me. I just want to get that off the board as soon as I possibly can. I don't care if you gain a little bit of life from that. It's gone.
Yeah, ironically enough, this card actually got a lot worse when they changed the rules of Commander so that tucking was no longer allowed. For those of you who don't remember the lovely tuck rule, that meant that when a commander somehow got shuffled into its owner's library, it just stayed there, and it wasn't coming back unless you managed to search it back in some way. That meant Condemn was pretty much a white commander staple for a really, really long time because it was the only way to deal with especially problematic commanders. That said, Condemn is now somewhat less powerful, as I'm sure you can imagine, given that tucking commanders is no longer a thing. Personally, I don't miss it, but that's just me. I don't like the fact that this puts a condition on the removal in that it only works on attacking creatures. That means if they just have a utility creature sitting there using, an activated ability or a triggered ability or something to continually hurt you, you're not going to be able to get rid of it with this card, whereas you could with something like Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Personally, I would rather pay almost a little more mana in order to permanently get rid of something, because odds are, if you just put something on the bottom of their deck, they may be able to tutor it back, depending on what colors they're in. That said, though, 1 mana to get rid of a potentially powerful creature is a good deal and really shouldn't be overlooked. Well, I am now going to go to another white card myself, at least in part. This one has a very special place in my heart, and As I was saying earlier, I've kind of got a grudge against the Azorius Guild and Dissension because I feel like they kind of missed out on the best elements of the flavor of the guild that they later nailed when they came back around to return to Ravnica. But this legend is definitely really awesome. It's Isperia the Inscrutable at my number 3 slot. This is a 5-mana legendary creature, 1 colorless, 2 white, and 2 blue, putting it firmly in the Azorius identity. It's a 3/6 with flying. Whenever Isperia the Inscrutable deals combat damage to a player, name a card. That player reveals his or her hand. Then, if they revealed the named card, you search your deck for a creature with flying, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Isperia was my very first commander deck that I ever built, which kind of gives this card a lot of sentimental value to me. The deck went away over the years as I gradually became more versed in Commander itself and the playing of Magic, and eventually realized that even though this card can give you a lot of benefits, you really have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to make it worthwhile. That said, it's still a pretty cool Commander option and can still be pretty powerful. We were saying earlier with Ratcatcher that free tutors are nothing to sneeze at, especially in this case where it's much more relevant. Any creature with flying? Come on, let's just think about how many good creatures with flying there are in the history of Magic. I couldn't even begin to name them all. This can be the head of a very cool flying tribal toolbox sort of commander deck, which is what it was for me. Heavily focused on control, because that is what the Azorius colors are typically all about. There are even some flying creatures that are counter spells themselves. The thing where you have to jump through hoops is actually getting that ability to trigger. You have to first do combat damage to a player, and you then have to name a card that you know is in their hand. That can be pretty difficult, and more often than not, you're gonna whiff the first time around. The good news is, once you whiff one time, you have a good sense of what's in their hand, and you're more likely to guess right the second time around and all the times after that. And also, there are certain cards out there that can help you with this. Telepathy, Zur's Weirding, those kind of cards that let you see actively what are in other people's hands, even if you're going with Flying Tribal, the much better Wandering Eye, which lets you see everybody's hands and is itself a flying creature. There are ways to get around this deficit. It makes it a little bit slow of a card for my liking, which is why it's no longer one of my commander decks. But that said, Isperia has a special place in my heart. And for those of you out there looking for interesting niche commanders, this might be one for you. Check it out.
Free tutors are great. Flying creatures are phenomenal, especially for their evasion. The only thing I wish this deck had more was a little bit more ramp. Because, 5 mana to play him, then turn 6, getting the chance to go ahead and do an attack and not get it. Turn 7, then you get the attack and then the tutor. It's a little bit slow in its paces. If you can get the ramp to work out with this, I think this would be very strong as a commander. Now, going from control to just pure chaos, I had to talk about this card. It is just so interesting, and I would love to hear some brews about how to make this thing crazy overpowered. It's called Kindle the Carnage. It costs one of anything and double red, and it's a sorcery. Discard a card at random. If you do, Kindle the Carnage deals damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to each creature. You may repeat the process any number of times. So the reason I really like this is really strong to turn on Hellbent or any kind of discard effect that you would really like to have. It works for Madness, it works for Delirium, and it's really, really strong for all that kind of stuff. Plus, Red loves its wheel effects. It's not too hard to just play Wheel of Fortunes or any of those other cards to make it so like, alright, I'll play this and I'll have the suspend, so next turn I'll get my hand back. I can afford to lose all this. And you can go ahead and just pow in for massive damage. It is at random, yes, but it is a pseudo board wipe for 3 mana. So it is low cost for that, even if it is high cost in the cards.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of randomness, but the fact that you can repeat the process any number of times kind of gets rid of the randomness element of it. As long as you don't have really low converted mana cost garbage in your hand, you're more than likely going to board wipe if you have any kind of sizable hand. This can also be really, really mean with a card like Repercussion, which allows you to basically deal damage to players every time one of their creatures takes any amount of damage. Just think about the combination of these two cards. That could possibly eliminate players very, very quickly.
And I mean, also think about it. Red has a lot of recursion of sorceries. Like, we have Past in Flames, we have Recoup, we have Charmbreaker Devils. So, I mean, yes, you'll lose your hand, but it's not like that hand's really going to be gone for long. And, I mean, there's tons of commanders that have strong synergies with this kind of play as well. Like we said before with the Locust God, you have Hazarat. Like, there's so many other commanders to really look into where it's like, yeah, this would be stupidly powerful.
Well, I'm going to go on to my number 2 now, and I should preface this by saying that my number 2 and number 1 cards are basically prefaced on the fact that Azuri Claw of Progress is one of my favorite commander decks, and both of these next 2 cards for me have homes in there. Number 2 on my list is another Simic sorta creature called Plaques Manta. It is a 2/2 for 2, and it is a blue creature. It costs 1 and a blue to play. It has Flash. When Plaques Manta comes into play, creatures you control can't be the targets of spells or abilities this turn, so basically all of your creatures get Shroud. And when Plaques Manta comes into play, you have to sacrifice it unless you spent at least 1 green mana to cast it. That last ability, let's just get this out of the way now, this only belongs in a Simic deck or decks with blue and green and maybe more colors in there. So more often than not, I would say like 99.9% of the time, that whole sacrifice clause is really never going to be an issue for you. I'm also kind of a sucker for ETB effect creatures and creatures that mimic the effects of spells, especially when they have Flash. A 2/2 for 2 that can come into play in the blink of an eye and that gives all of your creatures protection from removal for a turn. That is a pretty great card in my opinion, especially in a deck like Azuri where A, your commander's ability benefits from playing small creatures, and B, needs protection. Plaques Manta covers both of those bases, and I'm sure it's great in a lot of other decks too.
It's a really strong card, and it also is very versatile in that effect, where it has Flash, like you said. But also, it's green, it's tutorable as a creature, and it also can come back from the graveyard really easy as well. So, I mean, it's not like it's like a one-and-done spell like you see with a lot of other things to give Shroud at instant speed. This is something that can last and come back. I think it's very playable, very strong, and like you said with Azuri, it's just broken. Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't want this in there. It just gets you more counters, gets a big fatty, protects your stuff, let's do it again for another round. I mean, you might even want to sacrifice to get some sort of extra bonus on some of your other cards. Who knows? Now, going from a card that's blatantly obvious at how good it is to one that's going to make you guys think, and yes, I know I like doing this for my number 1 slot, but I'm going to be talking about one of the split cards from this set, Hide and Seek. And it either costs a red and a white, or a white and a black. This is before the fuse, so again, you had to choose back then which one of these halves you wanted to use. But they're both instants, so let's start with Hide. It reads, put target artifact or enchantment on the bottom of its owner's library. Now, if we think about this, this is red and white. Red and white don't have a lot of strong destruction against artifacts or enchantments, so the fact that it's able to tuck away something like this is very, very strong. But we move over to the other side for Seek. Search your opponent's library for a card and remove that card from the game. You gain life equal to its converted mana cost. Then, that player shuffles his or her library. So what is really good about this card is it makes it so a problem that's in a deck is permanently gone and you get additional benefits to it. Like we've gone in before and talked about Thada Adel, being able to remove problematic cards from a deck is good short-term and long-term, especially when you're able to gain life from it. This can be a quick, hey, I need a little bit of life so I don't lose the game, very strong for that regard, or to make it so somebody goes and tutors, response. Let's seek it out, you can't get it. That Blightsteel you're hoping to win with is gone now, and it is permanently gone.
Yeah, I'm a little bitter about all of these split cards in the old Ravnica set, because as you said, this was before they created the whole fuse ability that showed up in the Return to Ravnica block, where you, if you wanted to, could pay both halves of the card and get both effects. Obviously, these two effects would be very good when combined, but the existence of fuse cards makes all these older split cards look just that much worse by comparison, which always marks them down a little bit in my estimation. Hide is kind of an interesting one because while I think there might be stronger options out there, like maybe Vandal Blast or Disenchant or things like that that can really just destroy artifacts and enchantments and maybe prevent them from coming back for a little bit longer. In some ways, tucking them, as we see with a lot of other kinds of cards, might even be better, especially, as I said, artifacts and enchantments, which are not as easy to search straight up as things like creatures. Seek, however, brings a whole nother dimension to this, where you can just get rid of one especially big problem from your opponent's deck, whether it's a scary creature or other scary card, or a key combo piece that they need to win the game. The additional life gain tacked on there doesn't hurt either, and the fact that either half is an instant is also pretty powerful. There's a ton of split cards in Ravnica that I really just couldn't manage to wrap my head around them totally, which is why none of them really made my list. But I have to say, this one is one of the better ones, and if you're going to be playing this sort of card and you like having options, yeah, definitely consider hide and seek. Actually, though, speaking of artifacts and enchantments and hating on them, let's talk about my number one card, which does exactly that, and I think it's probably really the best in the game at what it does. Number one on my list is another Simic creature, and this one is Trigon Predator. This is a 3-drop creature. It costs 1, a green, and a blue. Has flying and is a 2/3. Nice, interesting, sort of defensive, yet also aggressive stats. However, the real money is in this second ability. Whenever Trigon Predator deals combat damage to a player, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. This is really kind of an understated and simplistic card, but when you think about the advantage that this generates and the amount of utility that it gives you, this thing is a house. I really cannot stress enough just how powerful the ability to on-demand destroy artifacts and enchantments, some of the most problematic cards in the game, can be. The fact that this, whenever it does combat damage, destroys one is good enough to put it on my radar, but it has evasion too. How unbelievable is this card? The stats as well, 2/3, it's not all that huge, but having a bigger butt than attack actually really helps this card in a lot of ways. You don't really need to do a whole lot of damage for this thing to do what it does best, which is eat artifacts and enchantments that are giving you problems. Whenever this thing hits the board against me and I don't have an immediate out to it, I get very, very scared. And that is for good reason, because as long as this thing can hit you, it is going to keep doing its thing and blowing stuff up. And the fact that it does so at such an undercosted rate and on a pretty solid evasive body for its size is just unbelievable. I still have trouble believing that this thing is an actual card.
This is a 3-drop. Getting this out early is not hard. And I mean, if you think about it, what's on the field first? Mana rocks, if they don't have the ability to ramp for lands. And I mean, there is also a later version of this kind of card, which is Steel Hellkite. And that is definitely a staple because it is an artifact. It can go in any deck. It can remove any type of thing that those colors can't typically remove. It's kind of like a Steel Hellkite Jr. if you think about it, because I mean, you're hitting artifacts and enchantments. It's such a good card. I don't know how this wasn't a rare back in the day because it just screams abusability, and it's so strong. So that's our pool time for today. If the water felt just right, be sure to check out our following segment in which we discuss the top 10 money cards from Dissension.
And if the toys that you play with are different than the ones that we've looked at today, let us know. You can do that by hitting us up down in the comments below, or you can check us out at MTG The Card Pool on Twitter, or even email us at mtgthecardpool@gmail.com. I'm Kyle Robertson.
And I'm Stu Galetta, and we'll see you next time at the Card Pool.